So thank you very much, Sarah, for that great introduction, and it's an absolute pleasure to be joining you this afternoon at the culmination of what I'm sure has been a pretty valuable and productive and inspiring forum. And it's actually really nice to be back in WA. So I spent 3.5 years here, based out of Kalingari. So prior to moving to Birchip, I worked as a land care coordinator for the Shire of Victoria Plains, and really that role moulded me and gave me all of the skills and opportunities for me to go on and work elsewhere. So this afternoon, I've got a bit of time. If I see you flagging, we'll head out for drinks a bit quicker than anticipated. But I wanted to share a little bit about my story and some of the things that I've learnt along the way about collaboration, value and success. Now, I don't profess to have all of the answers because there's no right or wrong way of doing these sorts of things. But I do think that we can actually learn a little bit from sharing our stories and our lived experiences and our war wounds. So I'm going to share with some of you the things that I've done in Australia, and also a little bit of work that I've done overseas and some of the great examples that I've seen overseas of communities doing things differently. And I'm also going to ask you to do a little bit of work in the groups at your tables. So let me just make sure I can go to the next thing. So there's a couple of things I'm keen for you to walk away with today when thinking about a strategic approach to partnerships and collaboration. I'm sure that you've all seen this map, the world, and I'm sure that today there's also been a bit of discussion about setting the scene in terms of the importance of the sector that we're in. But I just wanted to really reinforce that when you think about the world's population, the world looks different. And some parts of the world become fatter. So consumption and eating is an agricultural act. And there are populations burgeoning in the world to be fed by us. And whilst we might not be able to be the food bowl for Asia, we're certainly in an industry that's doing great things in supporting this burgeoning globe. Because we know that we need to grow more food in the next 40 years than we have in the last 10,000. And there's 2 billion extra people anticipated by 2050. And of which 2.7 middle class individuals in Asia that are going to have a different consumption pattern. So we are definitely in the industry. That's the right place to be. Now, Charles Darwin had a view on collaboration, and I'm sure that you've spent time today talking about collaboration. I'm sure there's probably not even a single speaker that didn't use that word in terms of collaboration, hammer home. It's absolutely crucial to do, but how exactly do we do it, and how do we do it better? There's a couple of things that I've sort of thought through in terms of collaboration, and I'd like to touch on today, and that's about how do we identify the right partners, because you can't just collaborate with anyone. How do you prepare the ground, acknowledging that other groups might also be targeting a similar prospect as you? What do you expect in the short term? And by short term, I say 2 years. And how do you plan to progress a longer term partnership? Are you only thinking of the annual knowledge or financial partnership? Or have you thought how you're going to be partnering with that individual, that organisation, that entity for the next 5 years, and you've mapped it out? What are the success factors for collaboration? And I think about these in terms of investment of time, treasure, in terms of financials, and talent, because that investment is absolutely crucial across those 3 areas: time, treasure, and talent. And what are the challenges likely to be for our collaboration aspirations? What are the communication requirements? And are we resourced and set up and capable and skilled to do those? What's the stakeholder engagement anticipated? To the way you want to engage, does that match the way they traditionally engage? Or do you need to influence that before you can actually really get it right? Where are the limited resources? Are they with them? Are they going to really struggle to engage with the opportunity, or is it with you? And what's the need for innovation and doing things differently in that collaboration opportunity? Assessing the impact, as Angela kindly and very enjoyably pointed out to us. And what's the backup plan? What if it doesn't go the way you thought? Have you thought about what-if scenarios? What-if scenarios was one of the key reasons why Birchup Cropping Group developed the yield profit system and program, because we wanted to have thought through, like in a flight simulator, all of the potential issues that would impact our crop. So let's test them through a flight simulator, a crop simulator, so that when it came to reality, we'd thought through how we might respond. And if any of you watched Samson's, I can't remember his surname, the guy that did Train Your Brain on the ABC, he demonstrated that if you think through a process and likely ramifications in your mind, you think about how you'll roll it out, you are more likely to succeed. Just like if you practice your presentations, you're more likely to get them right. So have we thought that through in terms of our partnerships? So a little bit of context then about my story before I get into a bit more talking about some of these collaboration elements and success factors. Like I said, I cut my teeth here in Kalingari as a land care coordinator, working in the Northern Wheat Belt. And Shire of Victoria Plains, we used to kindly say, was the arse end of the Northern Wheat Belt, and we occasionally got considered when they had to sit down. Kalingari, a town of about 130 people, really taught me so much. My first mentors came from Kalingari. They were community leaders, they were future leaders. Some were fantastic starters. Didn't finish much, but they were great at initiating action. Some were behind the scenes movers and shakers, and others just ploughed on through. But they were generally people who backed me. And in order to be a change agent and do collaboration differently in your organisation and your community, you essentially need to find those backers and those mentors, because guaranteed it's not going to always fall your way. And so you need that support system in place. And your organisation needs that support system in place with partnerships with other like entities as well. So I spent 3.5 years there as a land care coordinator, and it really grounded me in the fundamentals of community-led success and the importance of people and the importance of finding the thing that they got excited about, which was often not quite the same thing as what I got excited about. So as a land care coordinator, it was about setting up groups and getting people engaged in landscape management. And I realised quickly that there was a certain younger demographic that I wasn't getting to a traditional land care meeting. So what did we do? I started running top crop groups, because I'd attract a younger cohort. What they were interested in was production agronomy, and then we could chuck in just a little bit of the stuff that I got excited about. So fundamentally, thinking through the partnerships and collaborations that you've got going or you want to get going, think about what gets you excited and what potentially could that partner get excited about, and are they the same thing? And if not, how do you need to adjust those priorities and orders in order for a partnership to really work? Because you've got to put in time, treasure and talent. So to put in, you've got to get something, you've got to get something back, and you need to be excited and motivated to put that extra in. One of the things that I always got really excited about was having a direct impact on someone's life, probably why I then started volunteering with the ambulance service. And went on to do that for many, many years. And I think when we think about the organisations we work with, you're wanting to impact on an individual's life and what they do in a day-to-day decision-making, in their annual farm program, in their broader business strategy. And being able to see where you can have the impact is crucial, so that monitoring of impact and evaluation. I ended up moving then across to Birchup. I had a phone call saying, well, we're looking for a CEO of Birchup Cropping Group, and I thought, I've had 3.5 years here, I really understand natural resource management, and if I want to be a really well-rounded individual, I have to understand production, marketing, more of the commercial side of the industry. I had a boyfriend at the time on farm, and I vainly, or irrationally thought that absence makes the heart grow fonder. He quickly found someone much closer, and when I moved to Victoria, thinking I'd be back in a couple of years and then consult from farm, well, yeah, there wasn't much to come back to. So stayed in Birchip for then 10 years. I remember having my first argument with my chairman, Ian McClelland, who some of you might know, and he hung up on the phone in full exasperation that I'd actually challenged him that maybe what he was talking about wasn't quite right. And any partnership needs to have a degree of friction, because if you haven't been able to push back and robustly engage and debate, you're actually not really being transparent about what each of you is attempting to achieve and the benefits of leveraging off each other. So if your relationship with another organisation or an individual, apart from your personal ones, is too smooth, I don't think it's deep enough. If you haven't actually disagreed and robustly disagreed, I don't know that you're getting the energy and fire from that relationship to find innovative and new ways of doing things. A constant theme over my time at both Kalingaree and Birchip and then subsequently at FRRR has been about people, partnerships and collaboration. Because when I went to uni, I was all about anything that didn't move. So I studied geology and soil science and vegetation management because I didn't have to interact with people that moved and thought and had feelings and anything soft and fluffy. But quickly realised that no matter what we try and do in life, it's to do with people. So it's largely about the relationships and the way we interact and communicate that supports us to achieve collaboration and partnerships. I learnt that I sort of put 3 R's in collaboration and partnerships. For me, it's about rigour, relevance and relationships. Rigour in doing what we do well. If we don't have rigour in there, we're not doing it well enough, and we won't be able to stand up on our own 2 feet and have the street cred to ask people to change and respond to the evidence that we've presented. Particularly at Birchip, when we felt that we weren't getting sufficient adoption, we had to review whether we were doing our research rigorously enough in order to have it indefensible from a scientific robustness. Relevance in that making sure that we spend time on things that matter. These days we're so busy, we're moving from one thing to the next at frenetic speed. How do we know whether or not what we're spending time on is relevant to those that we're attempting to influence, partner with, change? We probably don't, because we don't stop and think and listen as to what's truly relevant, to stop doing the things that aren't. And relationships as the 3rd R, because absolutely nothing is achieved on our own, or nothing worthwhile. Now you'll know a bit about Birchip as one of the first grower groups in Australia. You can probably see my old house from here. This is Birchip from the air during the Millennium Drought, though it looks a bit green around the oval. So I was there from 2001 until 2011, which did happen to coincide with the Millennium Drought, and I left once it started raining, or maybe I decided to leave and then it started raining. I should have left earlier. At times it could look like this, which was quite depressing, and at times it looked like that, which was also just as depressing. Although in a drought our community fractured and we struggled to get people to come in and connect and participate. In the floods, people rallied around and people actually came out of hibernation with the flood at the end of the drought, got together and saved community assets. Much different disaster impact, drought versus flooding. Some people responded well to the challenges that the climate would throw at them. Others less so, and expressed that in various ways. And we did a piece of research called Critical Breaking Point during the drought, which was interviewing farm families, 60 farm families over a number of seasons between 2007 and 2010, and tracked how they were feeling and coping and impact it was having on them and their health and their relationships. And many people were judging each other through our community. Oh, I saw such and such go and spend money at the bakery and cafe this week after childcare. They must have enough cash to splash around. Or they've got a concessional loan, they bought a new car or put a swimming pool in. And we actually were judging each other in how we responded to these challenges that we were all experiencing. Ultimately, BCG was not just set up to address on-farm profitability and production, but it was because our chairman, Ian McClellan, said that he never ever wanted to have to play tennis on his own. So ultimately, the work that we were doing was ensuring that our community was vibrant and that there was prosperity there that meant we could attract other people and new entrants and actually feel like we had a fabulous community on our doorstep. The model of BCG was farmers, researchers and industry working together. And it rolls off the tongue, but it actually proved fairly challenging at different times because those partnerships weren't always on the same page, so they weren't always following and aligned with the same values and didn't always have the same vision in mind. It was a leadership team that included particularly a really innovative chairman who became more innovative after about 11 p.m. with a good bottle of red. Most of his great ideas were emailed to me at about 1 a.m. in the morning. And he was the person that really kept things relevant. He was thinking about what was relevant to his farm and his community. We had Harm van Rees as our research agronomist, who brought the rigour, who made sure that we actually did have a scientifically robust program, no matter what project it was. And I was part of that team around the relationships and the partnerships and making sure that stakeholders knew who we were and keeping communications open and engaging people in different ways. But there was a much broader leadership team as well. The whole board that knew that if they let the chairman go off on his own, it'd just be following a cloud of dust, and that wouldn't get us anywhere. So each and every person on the board and in the staff team played a crucial role. Hopefully that sounds like mine, but it's not. We used to go and explore around the world. This is one of the cereals field day in France, where they had all these great research trials, and right next to them you could sit down and have fantastic baguettes and champagne and French beer, and it was an environment that was really built around research, and a great time could go hand in hand together. And just the way that they designed these field days and big expos with industry deeply engaged, hospitality a key crucial element of it, made it an amazing experience. When we came back from that field day, the chairman and a couple of directors said, "Oh, you know, at this field day in France, they had, as you went through the entrance gates, women were there with little black French maid outfits on with espresso coffees. We think we could do that in Birchip." Needless to say, the staff team said no to the French maid outfits, but we were the first field day in Victoria to actually get an espresso coffee van to come to the field day, which was then a talking point, and it was again about lifting the standard and lifting the bar, because we were always trying to do something different and lift the standard of the event. Some of the things that we explored back in 2004, a virtual field day. So it's great seeing the GRDC virtual field trials now, because we gave it a go. It was really different and innovative. Didn't quite get off the ground because actually internet technology was a bit of a challenge at the time, but got out there and tried different things. And yield profit was one of those same things about thinking differently. We had our revenue from membership, sponsorship and projects. And really, membership was seen as a litmus test for our relevance. Membership didn't bring in a lot of money, but membership meant that people in some way valued what we were doing, and what we were doing must have been relevant in some way, whether it was just having a social entity or delivering good knowledge. Sponsorship We tried to always grow it, but we weren't very strategic with how we did it. And on reflection, I've got some thoughts around that I might touch on shortly. And project funding was largely the bulk. My life was spent in writing funding applications, as many of you would have the same. Through that 10 years, what I started to do was really take and think about our strategy in a 3 to 5 year time frame and start preparing project ideas and sponsorship partners to that same time frame rather than on an annual by annual basis, so that we were reducing administration time. We tended to have sort of little thought bubbles and come up with these great ideas, and we'd whip up a short project summary and pop them in the top drawer. And we'd take 5 or 6 wacky project ideas whenever we went to Canberra. And we started going to Canberra twice a year, just talking about what we were doing, just road testing a few of our ideas to see what might be of interest. So we might have had those project ideas in the top drawer for 12 to 18 months before the timing was right from either a government or industry perspective with funding available, and suddenly we said, we've done some thinking, we know that we could do this, and pull those project ideas out. We certainly punched above our weight in terms of what we did from a smaller community and a smaller base. And one of the ways that we did that was whenever we had a detractor, we would actually bring them into the fold, because those who challenge you and who point out your weaknesses can actually help you address them. And when I think about our partnership, and we had a fantastic, just long-term partnership with CSIRO. One of the reasons I'm now lucky enough to chair their advisory board is that at the Tasmanian Agronomy Conference back in about 2000, I think it was, or 2001, Peter Carberry got up. Some of you might know Peter Carberry. He's currently working in India, but spent a lot of time with CSIRO out of Toowoomba. And he stood up and said, these grower groups that are starting to emerge around the country are hodgepodge scientists. They do really crappy research, they're wasting money, they've got no rigour to what they're doing, and really, they're a fly-by-night. CSIRO, as true scientists, we're not going to, we just don't see the value of engaging with them. Our chairman was waiting at the steps for him when he got off the stage and said, oh my God, that was really amazing what you said, and I'd really love you to come and see what we do, and I challenge you then after you visited and seen how we do it to say the same thing. So invited a group of detractors up to Birchip to see how we were doing it. Now, they certainly still had suggestions on how we could improve, and we did then do a scientific review, established a scientific review panel to review all of our programs and provide us advice. But they then loved the relevance and the relationship piece and said, we can bring the rigour, we can help you to develop that in a partnership. And that was a long-term partnership, which then became a semi-commercial partnership through Yield Profit, where we took the practical side and they had the technology and science behind it. This is our version of the French Field Day. Doesn't quite look the same in the Mallee. Now, I'll just touch on a little bit about FRRR and some of what they do. As Sarah said, it was essentially established between Deputy Prime Minister with government, high net worth individuals, being one of the Meyer family, and the view that they could bring corporate Australia and philanthropic Australia on board in partnerships to be able to get dollars into rural, regional and remote communities. It's fondly called the philanthropic toothbrush of Australia, getting into those hard-to-reach places across rural, regional and remote Australia, because often the smaller the population, the more likely they were to get funds. Now, again, this organisation punched above its weight because it had a corpus of $10 million. The feds had given us $10 million, which we had to give back at any time if the federal government got into financial strife, and $10 million was going to actually help them. But we had $10 million there that we couldn't downspend, and we could earn money spend the interest. We ended up gifting out $9 million a year. Now, the maths, I know I'm only recently joined banking, but that maths doesn't work in terms of interest earned off $10 million to grant out $9. That was purely because of partnerships developed who would then put their dollars in to be able to grant out to rural, regional, remote communities. So it's all via partnerships. And that was done in a time when money is getting tighter, the philanthropic sector is getting more and more focused on impact and evaluation and evidence, and really wanting to know where their dollars are going. But everything was built around investing our time, our treasure and our talent in collaborating and developing relationships. Now, when I think about rigour, relevance and relationships with FRRR, the rigour that we brought in was very much taking a front step around impact evaluation. So our donors that were giving us that $9 million to spend wanted to see that their money was being invested and had a substantive return. So the frameworks to capture both outputs but outcomes and change meant that we weren't just capturing that evidence at the conclusion of the project, but we would track them for several years and go back and ask about that long-term impact. Relevance was really in the knowledge and the partnerships. So understanding what the issues were across rural, regional, and remote Australia, and essentially storytelling that to high net worth individuals, largely based in metropolitan communities. One of the things I learnt was that when I was dealing with high net worth individuals or trusts and foundations or donors in general, it was 18 months to 2 years from my first conversation before there being any agreement about dollars. So that is a long-term pipeline of relationship management that we needed to start implementing and tracking. And during that time, and even after the first dollar flowed, how do we engage? Do we assume, yep, great, we've got the money, they'll keep giving it, and we can back off from all of the sucking up that we've been doing for nearly 2 years? Well, actually, no, it had to then get more real. And so regular engagement, both through the courting period and then through the execution period, was absolutely crucial. I remember sitting around a table with a number of major trusts and foundations, and a couple of them said, look, we actually keep spreadsheets of the organisations we fund. If they don't ring us quarterly, if they don't send us their email, and if they don't invite us to particular events, that gets noted in our spreadsheet. And if they haven't themselves approached us with opportunities to connect with them at the end of the funding term, it's an automatic no for further funding through their assessment of what a partnership and a relationship was looking like. They didn't want to always come to the grant recipient and say, well, can we come to your events? Can we connect with you? Are you telling us about any staffing or board changes? They were really specific. I thought that was pretty harsh, but they did actually track that. Some of the examples that I'd like to just share in some of the communities that I think have been quite innovative and creative. I'll step through a couple of them now. Mergen in Queensland, the SES, was really creative in thinking about responding to emergencies and what infrastructure and tools that they use to respond to that emergency, and built a personal assistance lighting system, which they then used throughout their team. Now, they did that on their own, so they were really creative, had a great product. The challenge was that they never made any money out of this. It was a great idea that was picked up elsewhere, but they never got any financial reward because they failed to bring in some marketing and business partners that could help them commercialise this concept that was really needed in field-based emergency response, and it could have become a sustainable enterprise. Even if it wasn't a highly profitable one, it was a regular flow of revenue for their intellectual property. So that's an example of going on your own with a great innovative solution, but failing to have a few of those extra skills and knowledge to take it further. Narbathong, you'll all know about the dramatic bushfires in Victoria in 2009, Black Saturday. Narbathong was absolutely burnt to the ground. And one thing people remember in disaster impacted communities is the first person in, which is generally someone in uniform, and the last company or partner out when their recovery journey is coming to a conclusion, which is often 2 to 3 years after the event. So these guys remember McDonald's as the last company that finished supporting them to get this completely finished. So they redesigned their community hall, built the Taj Mahal, beautiful, had lots of corporate partners contributing materials and finances and financial knowledge and skills in managing a multi-million-dollar project in a community of a couple of hundred people. The challenge was when they finished, they'd actually failed to think about the long-term vision and what they were aiming to achieve, because they then had a building that had overheads and operational costs that could not be sustained. And so they've had to now go into a new mode of planning to say, how do we create an enterprise that can now financially underpin this piece of infrastructure that the disaster gifted us? Negative images of rural communities, farming communities, Indigenous communities abounds, and we're all very, very good at talking ourselves down and how tough it is, how hard it is, how challenging it is that it hasn't rained. One of the things that we did at FRRR was fund a group called Media Mob in Tennant Creek to address the negative image of their community, particularly young people who were said to be, from an external perspective, they don't do anything, they don't work, sniff a lot of petrol and other elements. And these guys created, through a multimedia program and utilisation of social media to share out messages, brilliant personal stories about what it was like for a young person doing different things within Central Australia, and absolutely changed their view of themselves, which can then dramatically influence how external people view them. So from a Birchip perspective, whenever we had millennium drought, it was pretty constant drought issues, but rather than getting into the media and talking about what we needed from government in terms of drought support, we would always go to government and say, here's a solution that you could come up with and get the profile, and it will fit with some of our issues and needs. So being more proactive in the positive media piece. A couple of small examples here, and I'll just talk about the one on the right mostly. Smoky Bay on the western side of the Eyre Peninsula, population of 198. They had a long-term vision of refurbishing their jetty. Why would you refurbish the jetty? It was a big tourism spot, the locals really connected with it, and there was opportunity for it to be a definite stop through the tourism journey. They raised $360,000 out of a town of 198 people via, 50% of that was raised via philanthropy, and 50% was raised via their pitching and lobbying for government funding. So regardless of how small you are, having that vision and spending the time to actually use a whole range of funding sources and collaboration can achieve brilliant outcomes. Now, Australia doesn't have the monopoly on good ideas when it comes to collaboration and being innovative in rural and regional contexts. I was lucky enough to go on a study tour to the US and Israel in 2014, and spent time talking to lots of organisations about rural community development, disaster recovery, and sustainable agriculture programs. And I saw some great examples of just how people shared time, treasure and talent in terms of harnessing the odd bods and unusual suspects. San Antonio and North Carolina both had these giving circles, particularly focused in San Antonio on Hispanic giving circles, and in North Carolina on women. There's a giving circle here in Perth. I don't think there's a giving circle for rural WA or for different parts of regional WA, where people feel that like they're aligned with the vision and value of the project that they're aiming to raise money for, and commit to funding that for a period of time, and it's often a longer term commitment. There was a great initiative called the Ideas Village in New Orleans, where a collaboration between local government, start-up companies, a couple of corporate entities and local business create an environment where they jointly put in money and offer funds to support ideas to address a particular issue that's relevant across that social and economic community. They then provide the safe space to explore it with pro bono legal advice and IP advice when it comes to making sure that you're going to earn a revenue off the ideas, and taking things out into implementation and execution space. So they were really fostering entrepreneurial thinking, and that's certainly one of the things that the US does well. So it was a great collaboration between multi-parties to address. They'd have to come up with the agreed issue that they could address, but then they all put in money or space or intellectual time. And a great one that I heard about from the UK in Berks County. So lots of people had concerns about loss of farmland to mining in that community. And one of the local community groups ended up hosting a community forum. It was as cheap as a couple of slabs of pizza and a paid facilitator for the evening. They created this conversation and dialogue that identified a solution, which was purchasing the farmland to help farmers then conserve the rural landscape and the productive land from mining. And the outcome? $56 million community-owned fund that pays landholders to maintain productive land rather than mining. Absolutely phenomenal outcome, and all they had to do was spend some pizza to generate the platform for collaboration and ideas to start flowing. And in Colorado, they had some phenomenal floods in Colorado, wiped out their community. And as in any disaster environment, government comes in and says, okay, we're going to fix this. What are the ideas? What do you want to put back where? Here are the programs. And great leadership was shown by this community, and particularly the mayor, who said, stop. My community needs 9 months to think about what's happened and determine our plan for where we want to go, our vision, and then you can come in and help us create that vision. So never ever feel that the power is with the funder. The power is actually with the people who can execute it. And taking the time to create the best plan will create the best outcome and execution. Saw the same thing in Israel, a land of US, which is scale and extremes, to Israel, a land of minuteness, and one that's heavily focused on security. But it prides itself on being an innovation nation, doing things with rigour that are relevant to their survival in many instances. Arguably, they probably fail in the relationship stakes, I would say. We know that big organisations and economies are not nimble, so often there is no need to change if you've got scale, because it's just too comfortable where you are. And small is innovative, but you need to be connected and to be externally aware. I saw some really phenomenal food hubs there in Israel, public-private partnerships where they were attempting to address issues that they had common agreement on, extending the shelf life of horticulture so they could actually exit it out of the country and get high-value food. Really entrepreneurial production approaches. And when I visited the Negev desert, I saw grower groups there just like we've got in Australia, but they were growing it in this saline desert, but really wealthy, productive farm businesses that were attracting young people, and particularly young people that had law degrees and phenomenal backgrounds, to come into agriculture because it was seen as the really sexy, profitable industry to be in, despite the harsh environment that they were living in. These really intelligent people didn't want to spend all their time in that harsh environment doing the field work. They created a partnership with some Thai farmers. Because Israel, all food production there in this part of the Negev desert was irrigation-based, and it was saline irrigation, so there was some really interesting technologies. They had a relationship and said to these Thai irrigation farmers, you come to Israel for 9 months, we'll billet you on farm, 6 days of the week you work on our property, doing all of the manual labour in the horticulture industry. So 6 days of work, which included 1 day of study, and they created a partnership with a university that came and 1 day a week would deliver a course in irrigation production. So the Thai farmer would come for 9 months, billet it out, so didn't have to worry about lack of accommodation, which we often faced within Birchip. They had 5 days of farm work, 1 day of learning and 1 day off. After 9 months, they had a qualification and they went back home, and they maintained regular dialogue between the Israeli farmer and the Thai farmer to help walk them through how they were going with adoption of some of the irrigation and production practices back in Thailand. Absolutely fantastic partnership where they were addressing the different needs of each of the sectors. I also spent a bit of time working in China, and this is not necessarily, well, it is actually, it's about relationships, because I was interviewing, in this particular year, I was interviewing people about what they were collecting from the catchment and what they were using instead of having to spend money on purchasing. And it got down, we did all the interviews through the interpreter, and then I said, well, what are the major challenges for you living in this region of China, which was between Tibet and Inner Mongolia? And they said, you know what? The biggest thing is finding a husband. That's what these women told me. I said, we have to go up over that mountain to the next valley. Do you know how hard that is? Because we were at quite an elevation on the edge of the Tibetan plateau, so you can't actually walk that fast. Well, I couldn't. In winter, it's -30 and there's an awful lot of snow. And in summer, well, the women are at 100% in the field. They said, it is so hard to find husbands. I said, actually, tell you the truth, I said, it's exactly the same issue in Australia. Absolutely the same issue. I said, I've had a lot of trouble and I've been to quite a few communities and still can't find a husband. But we know that ultimately when it comes down to it, it's about relationships and our own personal needs that dictate how we engage and what we get from community. I went up and did a workshop once in the sugar industry in Townsville, and they wanted to hear all about farmer-driven R&D and the Birchip model and how might they be able to take and adopt that model in Queensland. Comes back to rigor, relevance and relationships, and particularly relationships, because it's people that make things happen. And when I was up there, they were very keen on doing the R&D and getting the project information, but containing it. So only if you were part of the group and only if you paid the money would you get the benefit, which failed on the piece around broader community benefits, sharing knowledge, and actually growing community and industry prosperity more widely. I was back up in Townsville a couple of weeks ago with Rural Bank out in this patch, and have that grower group R&D and that ability to share innovation and adaptability, something the sugar industry still has not been able to do. So I've talked a lot about rigor, relevance and relationships, but and I think I've articulated about the detail around each of those. So let me just share a bit more. We often, in terms of rigor, we often gloss over the reason why we're engaging and partnering. That sounds good. You've got a partner to get a funding proposal. Putting it up by yourself is always a bit challenging. We want to do something, so we start doing something before we often give sufficient time to thinking through, are we responding to the right problem or issue? Are you doing too many things so that you fail to do all of them well enough? Do you know your top 3 focus areas so that you know that when it comes to the crunch, you know which things you can just let flow by the wayside? And do you know what you want to be in 3 to 5 years' time? Is there a vision for which the rigor, relevance and relationship is actually appropriate? Do you know where you're going? In terms of relevance, we all know that time and resources are scarce. I don't know how busy your days are, but they're probably ridiculous. And so ensuring that you're applying your efforts to the right area for the right reasons is absolutely crucial. The thing is, are they right for yesterday? Are they right for today? Are they right for tomorrow? And are we spending enough time thinking about the right things for our next phase rather than our current phase in survival? And do we test our plans against vision and strategy? Is it actually the right fit for what we want to be and what we're actually working on? And one of the things then is, how do you decide who to partner with? Talk lots about partnerships and collaborations, but who is the right fit for you. When I was at BCG, we sought partners that complemented our skill set, we really had thought through what we were good at and what we weren't good at, and listened when people told us what they thought we weren't good at as well. We looked for someone that had street cred because we always wanted to have credibility, because when you're a little fish in a big pond, you want to make sure you've got a mouthpiece that people will listen to. And we needed to have someone or an entity with a reputation for delivering. Didn't want too many starters and not enough finishers. At FRRR, we sought partners that shared our passion and our focus for rural and regional Australia. And now at Rural Bank, partner with those who align with our vision and our shared values around investing back in community. The challenge is that we often know the locals. We know those in the same sector as ourselves. I'm sure that you're all very well networked, you know each other, and when you go to a conference, you'll naturally gravitate to those people you already recognise and you want to catch up with, rather than, okay, I've seen a couple of shakes of the head, I know Paul doesn't do that, but rather than saying, who don't I know, who's here that I actually have not had a conversation with that, and I could have a possibility conversation with to see what they might be able to offer us. We need people that can inspire us and who inspire our communities to build their dream. And we all need people who are going to challenge us, because we're guilty of sticking with our favourite people and those that we work with easily or too easily. So for BCG, it was about, we'd often go to the same old researchers to come up with another project idea and another great initiative to pitch for funding. At FRRR, we had the habit of going to the same old funders rather than spending our efforts exploring and unearthing the unknown funders that are out there that we didn't have an existing relationship with. And at Rural Bank, or in any of our major financial institutions, you start funding and providing lending in industries that you're feeling really comfortable and familiar with. So you might not lend into something that's new and innovative. Now, that said, I don't advocate for promiscuity, seeking partners for short-term gain. Well, most of the time, depends what your age group is. It is best to seek long-term and multifaceted relationships with funders, critical thinkers, policymakers, and people who just get on and do it, because sometimes we can think a little bit too long. So from a position of understanding then around values and where we're all trying to go, we can analyse and critique our thinking. We can develop innovations and products and tools and processes and logic, moulding and shaping some really great ideas to create a practice that makes really good business sense for our communities and those that we're aiming to support. At Birchip, we created a position for Thinker in Residence. Oh no, she's winding me up already. We created a position for a Thinker in Residence because we were so flat out doing things that we really did want to have someone sit back, observe us from a different scale, and then come up with some ideas as to what else we could do, who else was out there. I'll touch on relationships again. Relationships really are at the heart of success, and partnerships, relationships, collaborations, whatever you call them, are really crucial, but they're never quite as easy as we think and as I can paint. One of the ways that we can build those is around long-term plans and long-term visions, because the benefits collaboration are really significant. I spent great time preparing Grain and Grey's program plans and proposals, which for the investment of several months of writing and designing then paid off with multi-million dollars. But you can't ever underestimate the investment that goes into cultivating those opportunities. And as I said earlier, with FRRR in the philanthropy space, it was nearly 2 years of cultivating a relationship or a donor before we actually saw a dollar. And we needed to know after those 2 years where we were planning to take them for the next 3. Champions, absolutely crucial, because if we don't have people championing us, and not just from wearing our own branded shirt or hat, but external, championing our issues, people won't think about, we should have a chat to them about what we're trying to achieve. You would have heard a lot today about communication and being regular with communication, innovative with communication. What I'm discovering is the larger organisation that you work in, and particularly in corporate Australia, the message has to be consistent for many years before it really is adopted throughout an organisation. So if you're partnering with us and doing sponsorship partnerships with Corporate Australia, you cannot change the thing that you want them to focus on an annual basis, because for them to commit to partnering with you for the long term, you need to have a consistent focus and a clear vision of where that's going in order to get them on board for the long term. And the best laid plans, well, they get thrown out the window because we know that people respond to different things. And there are ways that organisations will respond to adversity and your plan not quite going right. I've got a couple more minutes and then I'll be finished. Now, if you haven't got a really clear strategy of where you want to be in 3 to 5 years' time, selling your story to a potential partner and collaborator, they won't know what you want. They won't be able to tell if your vision aligns with their vision and what they're hoping to get out of a partnership. And then strategy is great, fantastic, but you actually have to spend some time looking at the results of that on a regular basis and sharing it. Now, I wanted to share just a couple of personal examples of where we've really stuffed it up at some of the organisations that I've worked with. Early on at BCG, we stuffed it up with GRDC. They were essentially our only funder, and we became quite complacent that every time the funding ran out, we'd put up another idea and they'd fund us. And I remember having a meeting at one point, and after the meeting, almost bursting into tears. I tried not to do it, do that in front of Stuart Kearns. But we rested on our laurels of assuming that we were doing a good thing and we aligned and they would just continue to fund us, rather than thinking about what's our risk mitigation plan, how much funding do we actually want from GRDC. We then set ourselves maximum of 30% of our revenue to come from them, and the remainder to be found from other sources. We decided that no funder would be more than 30% of our revenue because it put us in a high risk situation. So we learnt from nearly not having salary funds to pay anyone. A sponsorship partnership that became quite challenging, we had a partnership with BASF and they supported a number of trials and we'd use their product in those trials. One year their product actually proved to be quite opposite to what they marketed, and it was a disaster. And they said to us,